So just to set the stage for tonight, we're going to do a little, what we call a fireside chat without the fire. I'm going to ask a few questions. Probably I have like 5 or 6, but I think I'll just do 3. And then we'll give you all some chance to ask Dave and Ray something. But before we start, many people always ask me, who should care about soil health? You know, why is that a big deal? And so I always respond to them, I'm going to give you a list of like 6 things. And if any of these things are important to you, you should care about soil health. So let's start down the list. Decreasing soil loss and degradation. Maybe you won't care about that so much if you're not a producer, even though you should. Are you worried about water quality and water quantity? If you're worried about water, there's one thing. If you're worried about restoring diversity, both above and below the ground, is that important to you? Are you worried about the health of the ecosystem, the health of the planet, the health of the forest, the health of the wildlands? Are you worried about human health? Are you worried about community health? Are you worried about, we seem to be losing all this indigenous knowledge that we've had in farming systems? And are you worried about sustainability and economic sustainability for farmers so rural communities can thrive? If you're worried about any of those, soil health is your gateway to help with some of that. So as we think about soil health, we're really fortunate to have 2 what I would call visionary people who have built a lot of their lives around talking about soil health. And really, soil health has become, I think, part of their foundational core beliefs. And we're gonna hear a little bit more on why that's important, why that's a guiding principle for them. So I think we'll start, and looks like you're done eating, Dave, so we can start with either one of you. But if you want to take a few bites, we'll start with Ray. And Ray, okay. So Ray, why don't you introduce yourself? And as you do, think about and talk about how and why soil health has become so important, a guiding principle for you as you talk about your introduction.
Thank you, David. I think I'm humbled and honored to be here in front of all of you, really. And Allison and David, thank you for having me, and the rest of who are responsible. I think we all have something in common, all of us, whether we realize it or not. I think that we're all here because we either have love for the earth and for people. So really, David and I are humbled that we were just catalysts, or maybe we just spoke more. And from my perspective, being a retired NRCS employee, which used to be called Soil Conservation Service, what changed for me really was about 20 years ago. It was desperation, to be honest with you. I was a district conservationist in Oregon and lived on the Idaho side. I was in my 40s, and I realized something really horrid, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And this was happening, and I was responsible. I worked in Oregon, and I crossed the Snake River every morning. And that beautiful Snake River, that emerald green river, turned to chocolate on my border, that I was responsible as a conservationist. It really irritated me to no end. And the other thing that just really bothered me too, it just messed with my psyche, is I could not understand why a farmer could not make a living on 500 prime acres. If anybody knows about the Treasure Valley in Idaho, we have water. We have 5 rivers converging, we have wonderful soils, we have a great climate, and yet a farmer could not make a living on 500 acres. It's those 2 things that started for me to question Dave. In fact, when an organic farmer would come into the office, I'll be brutally honest, I didn't know what to do with him. I came from a conventional agriculture system. I put 8 years in the university being taught. My job is to control nature and force it with chemicals, tillage, fertilizer, our tools. But not one professor, not one mentor told me, no, Ray, your job is to learn how to emulate it, to love it, to nurture it. I had to teach myself that later. So what got me going? We were failing. And as an agency, Chuck, I couldn't handle it. And I got promoted into North Carolina, where I was at the tech center. It was by divine providence I got to be put there because it allowed me to share the message of soil health globally. I've been to every state. In the last 20 months, I have been in 6 continents. And I'm going to share with you the regenerative movement is growing globally. And I'll just share this one thing and turn it over to Abraham. What the word regenerative and what it means to me. The word comes from the word that when I use it is to regenerate, to renew. It's from the foundational word. I loved it because it came from that book of Colossians, be renewed in heart and spirit. When you go into the regenerative movement, you have to have a renewal of mind and a heart, where you start to love the land and the soil and realize it is alive. So it takes that kind of transformation, and it took that for me, because I'll say this last sentence. I deal with 98% of the producers on the global scale do not understand that the soil is alive. That's what we're dealing with, folks. We're dealing with that rudimentary level that most farmers think it's dirt, and it's a growing medium. But it's a dynamic living ecosystem. That's what we're dealing with at the level that we're at on a global scale. It is very few people like David or that have, and the farmers that I come associated have a level of understanding it's alive. So that's where my story started, David, is like that we were just seeing a lot of suffering going around on the global scale, and we were failing as an agency. And when you speak out, well, you know what happens when you speak out when you're a government employee. Yeah, you take a beating. But there's a lot of us that are thinking that way. So that's a little bit of my story right there.
Great, thanks. Dave?
I don't know where to start. My dad was,
I'm sorry, can everybody hear okay?
can you hear? My voice doesn't hear very well. My dad was an organic farmer, and I remember as a kid in upper elementary into junior high, going to fairs and other events with him, promote organic management systems and input materials for soil amendments that would help bring soil to life, and literally being laughed at, and especially one at the Kansas State Fair. The Kansas State Extension was across the aisle from us, and so that had quite an impact on me. And so when I started college, my dream was to be a medical missionary. And after a short time in pre-med, I changed my mind, continued with the same course of study, but then I got into a field ecology class, and the whole thing came alive for me, and tied right back into what Dad had been talking about all the time. So I kind of grew up with that. I suspect that in the late 50s, I was the only junior high kid in the state that read the biodynamics quarterly. And so that was all in my background. That field ecology thing really hit it for me, and kind of shifted gears. It was actually my professor there said you need to get out of here and go to the University of Nebraska and study soils. So that's what I did. And then I went to seminary, and I ran into Fred Kirschman with an experimental program. And I am very happy to say that Fred Kirschman was my first convert to organic. But it was through that and the work experience in the program that required me to work full-time as a student in this specialty experimental educational program. I spent some time on a mission in southeast Kentucky working with the ag program and local economic development until they ran me out, but that's another story. But Fred helped me find my way back to the farm, and finding that looking at soil health tied into personal health, tied into community health. And so that was a whole piece for it. But through that whole course of study, I came to realize that we could not treat other people with justice until we treated the soil or our earth ecology with justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the real push behind what we decided to do. And it was easy to come back to the farm because my dad was on the same page. So, and I was really lucky. It wasn't until his memorial service about 10 years ago, we had a register with me that tells you how slow I am. That why he always said that if we could get the right fathers and the right sons together, we could have twice as many organic farms. And he was telling me that when I was in upper elementary school, and it took me until his memorial service 70, 80 years later to realize where that came from, and that was between him and his father. So that's how I got to where I am today. And so when we came back to the farm, there wasn't a question of whether we were going to be looking at an organic management system focused on soil health, soil quality. We never called it regenerative, same thing though. We were looking for a management system that could be self-regenerating, self-renewing, based on how it was managed. So that's how we got here today.
I add a point about, I don't think people realize what Dave had to go through. One of the biggest reasons why regenerative agriculture doesn't grow very fast, the social pressure locally is brutal. I don't think we realize that. The social conditioning, even in the agencies, from the local community and the way up, is brutal. If you are outside that realm, and it's difficult, and you are treated horribly, and you're an idiot, and I think we need to realize the social conditioning and the groupthink is very difficult. And I think we forget that. And that's why it grows so slowly. It's going to take years. But David, thank you for the verbal beating that you took from the local coffee shop. Luckily for me, I did that in the agency, but luckily I just, if my wife is happy with me, I'm okay. But I think we need to understand that is socially is very difficult.
Early on in the process, even by the end of the 70s, my dad and I realized that our biggest failure at that point was not in figuring out how to invoice for our entertainment value.
Yeah.
Well, I've joked with Dave over the years, at least in pockets, Dave has been moved from being laughed at to becoming cool. Because there are groups of people that says, that's a cool guy out there doing fun stuff. So there are good pockets, right? So there's always hope.
Well, David, what's really exciting me, the new generation are all about the environment. That's why I'm so excited about seeing the youth, because they're more functional. I'm a baby boomer. I'm at the tail end of the baby boomer. But the millennials and the Z generation, they're about the ecology. They're about the earth.
I'm too close to the front end of the baby
Yeah.
boomers.
So I have a lot of hope. The younger people are really excited about it.
Yes. And it's interesting that when you look at the organic foods market, it's that generation that's really helping drive the growth.
Oh, what I love about organic, I do talks all over the country, and I love organic food. You know why? You have every race there, every spectrum, from breastfeeding to, when you go to an organic workshop, it is exciting. From Amish to Mennonites to black, white, indigenous, it doesn't matter, but organic just resonates with them. They're a fun group.
And getting back to that bigger picture thing, I worked a lot from the mid-'80s into the early '90s when organic standards developed. And actually, I was with that first small group that took a list of things too. Kathleen married it. So, but what I have learned since then, there were similar kinds of programs popping up all over the world. And it was remarkable to me how similar all of those were. They were probably, no matter where they originated, probably 90+% was total agreement. The other problem that was negative about the whole thing, they could find more ways to fight about 5% than anybody else I know.
So I can see I spent way too much time thinking about questions. I should have said, here's Ray and David, sit down.
I think that's our problem. We're so excited to have
Well, it is, and I think part of the beauty of this group, this is the group for the pre-event tomorrow, and I think everybody in this room is excited about this space. So let's talk a little bit about soil health and why it should be important to non-producers and rural communities. Why should they care if the farmers around them are incorporating soil health principles on their farms and ranches?
I have one very simple illustration, I think, that kind of addresses that a little bit. 4 years ago now, we had a long wet period. Within 3 or 4 days, we had 4.5 to 5 inches of rain. It stopped. Just before that rain started, I finished irrigating 2 fields. It's furrow irrigation, so you know I did a lot of cultivation and stuff. And we were moving cattle off of a pasture. And when we drove back down, it started raining again when we went to move cattle. So within that time it took us to move cattle, we got another 2.5 inches of rain. That was about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. So when we headed back to the pasture to pick up our mineral tubs and stuff like that to bring up, we were driving the Ranger down there, and the runoff from that pasture ran into the bottom of the Ranger. So it was probably 18 inches deep. All of the grasses that had been trampled in the mud looked like mud were floating to the top, but you could look through the water and see the soil surface. That impressed me a whole lot, which made me feel really good. But as we went on down, we were seeing the runoff off the hillside of the furrow irrigated soybeans and corn on the other side, and the water coming down the furrows was crystal clear. And as we drove on through there and back up to the pasture, every place we had runoff of pooled water, it was clear. And that made me think that if we could manage our broader community with that kind of soil quality and develop that and restore that in a couple more generations, the Blue River could actually run blue. I mean, that's a huge term. Just that piece alone about water quality and the amount of water that the soil can hold. But you know, even after 7 inches of rain in 4 days, there's a limit. But it's not washing. And that was running down the hill.
Yep.
So that's stuck in my head more than anything else, just that simple observation. And if we can hold water where it lands. And a visit from a board member from the Natural Resources District in the Antelope Valley, is it that covers Lincoln and going east? I don't remember the name of it. He asked me what they can do to help reduce the water load coming into Lincoln Road. And I said, put it on the grass and restore it and put more concrete. That's the simplest solution I know that could work for a long time. He said, I don't think that's going to happen. So, but we got to be thinking along those lines if we want to stabilize communities. And part of what they should do that is they do development of local food systems and local food infrastructure.
Ray, how about you?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that one of the most difficult concepts to teach people is everything is one. Everything is connected. We're soil on legs. I don't think we realize, scientists know now that 90% of us is bacteria, 10% is you. We are soil. And so everything's connected. So when the Kiss the Ground documentary came out, and one of the things, so sometimes it happens at times, we'll have this really rare moment that will say something articulate, and I think it was just a miracle. Because in the documentary I said, healthy soil, healthy plant, healthy animal, healthy climate, healthy human, healthy water. All that is a collective one. And it starts with the soil. Once we realize you can't have healthy communities, and I think we've lost that beauty and that elegance. It really started with the soil. I always said the blessings of the local community, if you go back long enough, it started with the soil, and it went, and that blessing flowed through the rancher and the farmer to the local community, to the local shop, to the local place where they sell shoes and all that. Everybody had blessings, and it came from the land. Now the blessings goes to corporate America, and the wealth goes to corporate America. Now rural America is suffering, and we're having the largest suicide rate is with farmers and ranchers. And I couldn't understand, why do we have the highest suicide rate in the top 5 careers, and yet we work with God's creation on a daily basis? Something is not right. And so that's what I started to realize. All this is collectively connected, folks. Once we get the rural America in the soil right, the blessing will start flowing to the community. Our farms and ranches are too big, and nobody wants to hear that conversation. There's a great saying by Masanobu Fukuoka who said, the fertility of the land is based on the number of footsteps you take on it. If you're farming 20,000 acres, it's hard to take that many footsteps and to really know each square inch of that land. And so those are the kind of dynamics that we're dealing with. And so that's why I think the community, this is the foundation that we can start healing the land. And I'll leave this other thing. One of the big subjects I really like is eco-theology. Why are we not teaching this in our churches? We have a lot of sermons on a lot of things, but we never talk about being the stewards and bringing restoration to the planet. It's rarely taught in the churches, and that's disturbing to me, because we're supposed to be the best stewards, and it's really taught from a biblical perspective of stewardship, and it's rarely taught. So I think that's beginning to change, and we bring up that conversation. Can you imagine if we have 2 billion professing Christians also promoting regeneration? We could be quite a force. Some thoughts?
That reminds me of it. I was invited to do a program on environment stewardship from the perspective of biblical perspective.
Maybe a little leverage.
And I talked a little bit about the ecology and all that went into making healthy people and healthy communities. And one of the responses I got from one of the persons, he said, well, I don't think we should be investing in anything to try and help restore the environment, our soils, or anything like that. My responsibility is to make as much money as I can, no matter what I have to do, so I can increase my tithe.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and that's a true statement. I think that's true. And in the book of Job, I don't know if many of you know the book of Job, but Job was the largest grazer in the Middle East. There's a beautiful little scripture that says, the land does not cry out against me. He was a good grazer. He took care of the land. And stewardship's always been talked about, but it's rarely acknowledged in our churches and our communities. And I think that needs to change.
We had some great models when Europeans settled this country, the indigenous communities and their resource and ecological management of the land and resources was phenomenal. And their productivity was amazing. And I don't think we've ever been able to match it.
And it's interesting because in the biblical rest of the 7th year, Sonny and I rested our farm after 7 years. No animals. We just and please understand, a rest means a green fallow, not a bare fallow. So I have this saying now about grazing. If you give the land rest, it almost makes you look like a good manager. I never saw so much diversity, so much beauty come back on the farm by not grazing it the whole year, or giving a particular field just rest. I have more hope for Chernobyl to heal than our agricultural land. What do I mean by that? How many remember Chernobyl? Some of you who are not born. Who was born after 85? Raise your hand. 1985. Do you guys know what Chernobyl is? Remember? We all remember that, remember? We were told that when it blew up, that we were going to have a desert. Remember that? It was going to be a horrible thing. Nothing would ever grow. It was a disaster. The plume, a million people died or more. It was horrid. Remember how frightening that was?
Yep.
How many of you have Googled Chernobyl lately? There's reindeer, fox, and animals coming back. They found a fungi that eats radiation inside the core that's eating the radiation. The reason I bring this up, folks, our planet is incredibly resilient. And I get kind of disgruntled at times when I hear people, we only have 60 years left. Don't worry about the planet. It's about us.
We
The
may
planet
only
is...
have 60 years left. But
we may have 60 years left, but the planet... let's remind you about 4 or 5 years ago when the oil spill happened in the Gulf. Remember that? Remember all those millions of gallons pouring out of that? What happened to the oil? We have an incredible planet. We're the problem. So I'm not negative about the future. So I have a lot of hope for the future. Look at these young people out here. We're going to fix this. So I'm not negative about the future. I'm very hopeful. That's why I don't like when they set this, the United Nations says we have 60 years, 60 harvests left. Bullcrap. In fact, the planet is greening up by 8%. It's satellite imagery, it's getting greener. It's happening, folks. People like you who show up today. So I have a lot of hope, David.
Great. So we've got like maybe 10 minutes left.
Yeah, let's
so
go for
that's okay. I'll ask just one more quick question, unless somebody has a burning question. If they do,
Yeah.
I'll defer. Okay, so I guess if nobody does, I can't help but think about, since we're in the middle of this amazing prairie that has been near and dear to my wife's and I's heart and Sarah's heart for a long time, but as you think about the prairies and how they evolved and how they grow, how should that help inform producers as they think about designing their agricultural systems?
that was number one, our system development. This is the context in which our soils developed and which they came about. So that's what led us pushing all the time to include more diverse grass pastures and stuff in our rotations and grazing periods. But our soils and these resources really developed in a symbiotic way between ruminants and grass and a whole assortment of forbs, which I think we underestimate the importance of in those mixes. And that's what we tried to emulate a little bit in our cropping systems.
And I must say you've done that as well as just about anybody I've seen, Dave.
I question that a lot. But
I think one of the biggest, most important books was, I think David and I were walking up. The book that had the biggest impact on me was Alan Savory's book called Holistic Management. When I read that book, it shattered my paradigms, and I'm going, oh, you idiot, you missed it. 8 years of university, you forgot about the power of diversity in microbes. And then I started buying every book on soil ecology. Then I started to realize the prairies, when Dave and I are talking about emulating the prairie, we're talking about the architecture of it. Every plant captures sun differently. Every pollinating, the insects, it's not just the herbivores. It's the biodiversity of the insects. It's the colors. It's the flowers. It's the broadleaves. It's the architecture. When I design cover crop mixes for farmers in corn and soybean, I design mixes that mimic that pattern, that architecture. Our goal is to emulate nature's patterns and bring as many insects and diversity of animals into the system. And then once you do that, each plant leaks different communication and exudates to the microbes, and it talks to the soil. And it releases and it eliminates soil toxosis. When you plant corn and soybean, nature will poison itself out. It's called soil toxosis. And the only way to heal it is diversity of plants and rotation of data. There's no other way. We've done that since the 1930s. The Russians were the best soil microbiologists in the world. They knew about that. So that's why it's this journey that we went through of learning about how powerful biodiversity is.
All right, very good. I think we'll quit there. I know everybody's got a big day tomorrow. We'll hear a lot more tomorrow, but certainly want to thank both of you for everything you've done in the past and look forward to tomorrow. Anybody have anything else?